Yeah, I'm working on this feature about kind of the Dave Lagana, Billy Corgan, new NWA type of thing, and I rewatched actually Seven Levels of Hate this week because I knew that would kind of give me a little more insight on it, and I remember Dave Lagana actually filmed your title win, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, he did.
So, I mean, this isn't like his first go-around with being a part of something trying to make the NWA title mean more, right?
Yeah, I guess in those terms you could say that.
And I mean, I remember back then. I remember it was almost not necessarily fresh off of the NWA TNA split because it had happened maybe a few years before, but there was like there wasn't any buzz around the NWA title until you and Adam got a hold of it. Was that kind of the motivation for that entire method, that entire, I don't want to say the entire feud, but was that your motivation for that?
To be honest, it was the NWA title was more about working for Dave and bringing respect for Dave's title, and that's the title that Dave was using, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So, which is now Championship Wrestling from Hollywood, and I've worked with Dave for so long, and he had been bringing me out, and that was, he was using that as his main title, and so for me, it was more of like, I don't know if in my heart I was trying to make the NWA Championship mean something. I'll be honest, I think I didn't. Obviously, I have a lot of respect for the title, but because it had been dormant for so long, I feel, until I won it and I started hearing from some of the older generation and telling me like how cool it was, it didn't really start. I don't think it hit me that much in terms of being the NWA champion and the lineage that came with it. I just remember.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I just remember one of the first texts I got was from Dr. Tom Pritchard, and to read his excitement for me having that title was one of the first catalysts of me like realizing, I guess, how important it really was.
So were you a WWF guy when you grew up? Were you an NWA guy? Did you kind of grab anything you could get your hands on?
Yeah, I was everything. I just loved wrestling, and believe me, I knew and respected the NWA title, and I knew, even to the idea of Dan Severn and Colorado Kid, I understood what was going on with the NWA Championship as a little, reading the PWI magazine. But I liked everything.
So I remember they kind of in the middle of this Adam Pearce Colt Cabana feud, there was the Sheik situation. And there were a lot of politics that go along with that, and this is going to kind of lead me into where we are today as well. But it was a governing body. It doesn't look like it's going to be that any longer. Do you think that's the right move to make?
I just think it was kind of silly that it was a governing body back then. So I don't know if it was I don't know if it's the right move now. I'm sorry. I guess I'm not. I don't know how deep I am into the current day NWA, if that makes sense. So it's not something I really think about too much. So I don't really have a bold opinion on whether it should or shouldn't be a governing body nowadays.
Sure. Have you been made aware of any of the advancements that Dave or Billy Corgan have tried to make, or have you seen any of the videos, or has any of that popped across your timeline or anything of that nature?
Yeah, I watched a couple of the videos, and I know who, I guess now I know who Tim Storm is.
Yeah.
And
same here.
Right. And so, especially after I've literally wrestled everywhere ever as almost 20 years in independent wrestling. And that was a first for me, which I thought was interesting. So, I go back with Dave a long time, Lagana, and I'm, back to the developmental days in OVW. Dave and I had a working relationship. So, I'm aware of what he's trying to do, and I applaud him for it.
So you mentioned Dave Marquez earlier. What do you think about them defending that championship there? It seemed like their best platform to do it.
Yeah, and the Daves have been working together for a long time, and
The Daves.
Marquez has, yeah, it's like Office Space. And Marquez, he has this beautiful little thing that he's worked so hard to develop over the years, and he's not like a super internet. He's not going really for the internet crowd that much, so. He's on local television in Los Angeles, which is pretty crazy. And now he's on all these places all over because of his deal with the CW network. So I think it's great for anyone. Yeah, I think it's great I think it's a great place for the NWA to start, is on this kind of local and national television platform.
What were some of the things that you dealt with back then that you were like, these types of politics shouldn't happen? Whether it's because they were a governing body or not, just like, that's weird. Why is that happening in this day and age?
It was kind of a long time ago, so I'm just wondering. The idea that there was there were so many irons in the fire, I guess, which goes back to your point of it shouldn't be this governing body, but
you always hear of the board members, like it's
up
to the board,
especially with the Sheik stuff and all of that, like. And I guess because it's almost like it's a title, it wasn't a promotion, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's not this one booker, it's this thing that can go anywhere. And it seems like so many people had an invested stake in it that it made it a little difficult. And especially for me, because at that time I was, that was one of the hottest periods in my career. And I was, just like I am today, but I was booked to, 150 shows, I was on the road 200 days a year. So between tours of Germany and Japan with Noah and Europe and England and Scotland, then like to make sure, and that's eventually why they, I think they weren't interested in really working with me anymore, is because I wasn't willing to say like, I'll drop everything. Excuse me. I'll drop everything to dedicate my life to the NWA when my career was going very well forward. It was almost like a lot of the quote unquote board members wanted me to like almost kiss the ass of the NWA title, when in reality I thought I was helping the NWA title because it had been dead for so long. And I had this crazy schedule, including when I won it. I right away I went on a tour of Noah and was defending it in Tokyo at Corgan Hall. And, it's not like I wasn't booked because I was the NWA champion. I just showed up and I was like, hey, I'm the NWA champion. They're like, whoa, really? So like I was helping bring prestige back to this title. And I think they were upset that, like I wouldn't like, I don't know, sign some kind of, it wasn't even a contract, but they wanted to give me all these dates. And I was like, great, as long as you give me the dates, but here's my schedule. I'm already booked up here, and here. I'm not going to cancel them. I'm not going to cancel those dates to appease you, but just give me the dates on time. And also I will go to these places and I will represent the NWA with this championship. So.
And from a financial standpoint, no disrespect to the Sheik, but doesn't it seem like even at that point, like you making some of those dates would mean more financially than him making all of those dates? That's in my head, that's what I'm thinking. Adam Pearce doesn't mince words on that documentary. He says, I'm kind of getting a rub off of this too, because a lot more people know who Colt Cabana is than I am. And I remember the line in there, like you had like 50,000 Twitter followers at that point, and the NWA had like 500. And to be honest, until about 2 weeks ago, I didn't know the NWA had a Twitter.
Right.
And I covered this for a living. So, like, when you see things like that, like and you're talking over matches with Adam and stuff, does that come up? Like you two, like, do you kind of know that it's going down the wrong road at that point?
In a perfect world, I just wanted them to. I wanted them to hopefully realize what a good situation I thought it was for them. That I'm going to kind of give this a rub and take this all over the world, like I was doing.
The world's champion.
Yeah, as opposed to, and Adam did a good job, but even before that, some of those guys, it's just nobody knew who anybody was, for years, and it's like, I don't know. So I was just hoping, and I think that's what Dave Marquez wanted. Was he realized that I was going all over the place and I could take this title all over, and that's when like the idea of those of the other board members who didn't have the same view as Dave, and that's kind of where those fights kind of came in. I thought Dave was a little more forward thinking, and the old guard was a little more old guard. So as long as Dave was on my side, I thought there would be a fighting chance, but then all that stuff with Dave went down, and I don't even want to mention his name because I'm afraid he'd probably sue me. But there's a lawyer in Texas who I think didn't see that way, and I don't know. He got in bed with a bunch of other people, and it all kind of went south from there.
Doesn't that entire procedure seem like incredibly dated?
Which procedure?
Like just all the politics involved and the multiple people, and as you mentioned, all the different people that are just involved in making that one decision, and it's not a promotion; it was a title at the time.
Yeah, it was dated, but you have to understand the people who the wrestlers and the people who were trying to keep the NWA championship alive. They're almost. That's who represents that, is those people who kind of live in the past a little bit. And so they're thinking of doing business in the way of the 70s and 80s as opposed to doing it in 2017 or 2020 or 2030. So I do think it is outdated because people involving themselves with the NWA championship who are still holding on to that, I think, they're living in the past a little bit. Not to say, and I might get misquoted by this and look shitty, but not to say, I hope that Lagana and Billy Corgan aren't those people, and it moves forward. Mm-hmm. But for years, people associate, while the NWA title was kind of not dying, but while it wasn't what it was, people were still holding on to it and holding on to the way it used to be and couldn't let go of that.
In the piece that I've kind of drafted up, I mentioned that every single champion cuts the same promo. This is the title that was held by Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes, and it's like, we know that. We know that by now, but it's not anymore. Does it ever surprise you? It seems like every few years the NWA finds some way to latch on to a relevant promotion. Whether it's ECW briefly in the 90s, WWF 98, TNA 2002, Ring of Honor 08, New Japan just a few years ago. Does that ever surprise you when you kind of see it and it pops back up and it's like, oh, well, there's that title I held?
I don't know. It's funny you say that. I haven't really thought about it, but it does have such a wonderful history in this this industry's past, and it's like there's only so much that's real from the past that you can kind of present today. It's like you don't have to spend time getting it over; it's already over, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's why it is. It's like it's an easy, cheap shortcut to getting something over, which isn't a bad thing. I don't think.
I get the feeling that's why they never changed the look of the title too. After decades and decades, is because it's identifiable.
Right, of course. And again, from a marketing standpoint, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So when the Sheik project did not work out, you became champion again. Adam Pearce had held the title for quite some time. What was your relationship with the NWA like after that? Because it was kind of one of those situations where I know that you had pleaded your case to them prior, and it didn't end up going that direction. But what was your relationship with them like after that?
Well, I'm trying to think, because that was in the time, my relationship with Dave was always great. And I think Adam and Dave Marquez, Adam and Dave, that was their move to do that, to put it on me. And then we went into that seven stages of hell. And then I think during the middle of that whole thing, that's when then it got, I think the Texas guy took it back over. And in the middle of the 7 stages, that's when it all kind of went to hell. And then at the end, they wanted it off both of us, even before it was supposed to end. I think that was all in the documentary. Mm-hmm. So my relationship with those guys, the Texas guys, was never good. And I only had one long conversation with the guy. And that's when I told him, like, I'm going to take my dates. And that's when I could tell he didn't want me to be the champion anymore. But before that, I guess it was Bob Trobich, but I never really had a real relationship with Bob Trobich. All my dealings kind of went through Dave Marquez, and I think the world of Dave. I think he's great.
And then they had the situation where Adam left the NWA because they wouldn't allow him to defend the title. Like, was that bridge ever rebuilt between you or Adam and the people involved with that decision?
I went and worked for I think one of the guys' name was Tony, and the guy from, not the lawyer, but the guy from Houston. And I didn't even realize I was wrestling for him. That's how, like, I didn't even know who he was. Some other guy had booked me, and I guess he was the one running the promotion. So I just said hello. Because, at the end of the day, it was very sad that it went down that way. But again, like, my career is and was still fine, so it didn't. I just went on with my wrestling career. It wasn't this huge chip on my shoulder, or did it really hurt me financially, or take away work from me. It was just a sad thing that didn't go the way that I would have liked it to have. It was just like I had just moved on. And for me, business-wise, it wasn't that big of a deal. I guess professionally, I would have liked. The goal was to kind of have it for a year or two and kind of take it around the world, and that just didn't happen, and that's what always kind of upset me.
And kind of as we close off, did you have any thoughts when you heard that Billy Corgan was going to be taking this over?
I thought it made sense. From an outsider's perspective, I know that Billy really, really wants to be a part of the wrestling promotion. The wrestling industry. And obviously things didn't work out with Impact. I don't think, Ring of Honor doesn't need him or anything, and WWE that's not a real. So it's like either
you got a couple of companies that are ran by like billion-dollar situations.
So, I think it's like it's a nice outside the box thinking for him to say what else is left, as opposed to, he started that Resistance Pro in Chicago, and after a year or two, he kind of gave up on that, or he kind of took himself away from that project. So it kind of makes sense to see what's out there and see that the NWA was kind of dormant again, and maybe try to use the history and the lineage of the NWA. I don't know. I think it makes sense, and it's probably a smart move on his behalf.
Have you ever interacted with him? You're a couple of Chicago guys.
Yeah.
Do you all get along well? All that?
I think so.
And now, this one won't be used in the piece, but I got to follow up since I asked you if Grado could beat him out. Can Tim Storm eat more Arby's roast beef sandwiches without the bun than Luke Gallows?
No.
He claims he's never blown up in 20 years of wrestling.
Tim
I don't
Storm?
think he's going to blow. Yeah, that's what he claims. So I think that Luke Gallows can out-cardio him when it comes to Arby's roast beef without the bun.
Oh, I don't think it's about cardio. I just think it's about that stomach room. I think he could. I think he could just hold as many roast beef shavings as possible.